In this age of infinite distraction, we have forgotten a fundamental truth: attention is not merely a tool for productivity, it is the very gateway to wisdom. What passes for focus today is often nothing more than frantic multitasking disguised as efficiency. True concentration, the kind that transforms both mind and soul, requires something our ancestors understood but we have abandoned: the cultivation of attention as a spiritual discipline. For decades, I have observed brilliant minds scatter their energies across 1,000 fragments, wondering why their studies bear no lasting fruit. The problem is not lack of intelligence, but lack of what we might call contemplative concentration, that profound gathering of the whole person around truth. Today, I will share with you the ancient Dominican techniques that can restore authentic focus to your intellectual life. Methods tested by centuries of scholars who understood that attention itself is a form of prayer. These are not mere productivity tricks, but formative practices that shape the soul for the reception of wisdom. When we learn to attend properly, we discover that concentration becomes not a burden but a joy, not an effort but a participation in the divine ordering of creation itself. Chapter 1: The Sacred Nature of Attention. Before we can master concentration, we must understand what it truly is. Attention is not simply the mechanical fixing of the mind upon an object, it is the total orientation of our being toward truth. When we truly attend, we do not merely observe, we enter into communion with reality itself. This is why the modern approach to focus fails so consistently. We treat attention as a resource to be managed, like time or energy, rather than recognizing it as a capacity to be cultivated. The contemplative tradition teaches us that attention is fundamentally relational. It connects us not only to the object of study but to the source of all truth. Consider how you approached your last serious reading session. Did you merely process information, extracting facts like a machine? Or did you allow yourself to be changed by what you encountered? The difference lies in the quality of attention you brought to the task. Surface attention schemes across ideas, gathering data. Contemplative attention descends into ideas, allowing them to penetrate and transform us. This sacred understanding of attention has profound practical implications. When we recognize that every moment of focused study is participation in the divine ordering of creation, our approach to concentration changes entirely. We no longer force attention through willpower alone, but cultivate it through reverence, patience, and trust in the process of gradual formation. The ancients spoke of recollection, the gathering of all our scattered faculties into unity. This is more than psychological integration, it is spiritual reordering. When attention becomes prayer, and prayer becomes attention, we discover that focus is not something we achieve but something we receive. The mind that is properly ordered finds its natural rest in truth, just as water flows naturally downhill. This is why we begin our formation not with techniques but with reverence. The scholar who approaches each text, each problem, each moment of study with a sense of the sacred, discovers that attention deepens naturally. What seemed like tremendous effort becomes effortless flow when we align ourselves with the natural orientation of the intellect toward truth. Chapter 2: The Enemy of Deep Attention, Spiritual Agitation. Modern distraction is merely the external symptom of a deeper malady, spiritual agitation. We cannot achieve lasting concentration while our souls remain in turmoil. This is why all the productivity techniques in the world fail to produce the deep focus that great scholarship requires. Spiritual agitation manifests in countless ways: the restless need for novelty, the anxiety that drives us to check messages constantly, the inner commentary that chatters endlessly during study. But its root is always the same: a disordered relationship with time, with ourselves, and with truth itself. The contemplative tradition identifies three primary sources of this agitation. First, there is what we might call temporal anxiety, the feeling that we must accomplish everything immediately. This urgency corrupts attention because it makes us focus not on the present moment of learning but on future results. True concentration can only exist in the eternal now of encounter with truth. When we study under the pressure of deadlines and expectations, we create what I call divided attention. Part of our mind remains on the material while another part calculates progress, worries about outcomes, or compares our pace to others. This division is exhausting and ultimately counterproductive. The mind cannot serve two masters simultaneously. Second, there is ego-driven study, learning motivated by pride, competition, or social validation rather than love of truth. When we study to impress others or to maintain our reputation, our attention is divided between the material and our own image. This divided attention produces the characteristic restlessness that prevents deep absorption in ideas. The scholar motivated by pride approaches each text asking, "How can this enhance my status?" rather than, "What truth does this reveal?" Such ulterior motives create internal noise that makes genuine concentration impossible. The mind obsessed with self-image cannot lose itself in truth, and without such self-forgetfulness, deep learning cannot occur. Third, there is what Thomas Aquinas called concupiscence of the eyes, the disordered desire for new experiences, new information, new stimulation. In our digital age, this manifests as the compulsive need to check social media, news, or email. But the principle is ancient. When we seek novelty for its own sake, we lose the capacity for sustained attention to any single truth. The remedy begins with inner ordering. We must cultivate what the tradition calls recollection, not merely gathering our thoughts, but gathering our whole being around our highest purpose. This requires regular periods of silence, deliberate detachment from unnecessary stimulation, and the patient cultivation of contentment with present duties rather than fantasy about future achievements. Chapter 3: The Monastery of the Mind, Creating Sacred Space for Study. Just as the monk requires a cell for prayer, the serious student needs what I call a monastery of the mind, both external and internal conditions that support deep concentration. The ancients understood that environment shapes consciousness, and consciousness shapes attention. Begin with your physical space. The place where you study should be dedicated solely to that purpose, kept simple and beautiful, free from distractions that call the wandering eye. This is not mere aesthetics but psychology of the sacred. When we enter a space consistently associated with serious study, our minds naturally prepare for focused work. The environment itself becomes an ally in concentration. Remove all unnecessary objects that might capture attention, not just obvious distractions like phones or televisions, but any visual clutter that fragments focus. The study space should be sparse enough to support concentration but beautiful enough to elevate the spirit. A few carefully chosen objects, perhaps a beautiful book, a simple cross, or a piece of art that inspires contemplation, can actually enhance focus by creating the proper atmosphere for serious work. More important than physical arrangement is the cultivation of what we might call temporal monasticism, regular periods of absolute dedication to focused work, protected from interruption as jealously as a monk guards his hours of prayer. This temporal monasticism requires what our tradition calls custody of the senses. In practical terms, this means creating clear boundaries around your study time. Establish what we might call monastic hours, specific periods each day when you are completely unavailable for anything except study. During these hours, no phone, no internet unless essential to the work, no music with words that compete for attention. These are not mere productivity tips but spiritual disciplines that honor the sacred nature of learning. The internal monastery is even more crucial. This is the cultivation of what the masters called holy indifference, the capacity to remain unmoved by external pressures and internal anxieties while engaged in study. When criticism, praise, success, or failure can disturb your concentration, You remain a slave to circumstance. True focus comes only to those who have learned to work from a center that the world cannot touch. Develop the habit of beginning each study session with a moment of recollection, not just organizing your materials, but ordering your intentions. Why are you studying? What do you hope to serve through this learning? When study becomes consciously directed toward truth and service rather than personal advancement, attention deepens naturally. Create rituals that signal to your mind and soul that you are entering sacred time. Light a candle, read a brief passage of wisdom, or simply sit in silence for a moment. These simple practices communicate to your entire being that you are transitioning from the scattered attention of daily life to the unified focus that serious learning requires. The ritual itself becomes a doorway into contemplative consciousness. Chapter 4: The Art of Slow Reading, Contemplative Engagement with Text. In our age of information overload, we have forgotten how to read. What passes for reading today is often mere scanning, the rapid extraction of data points from a text. True reading, the kind that forms the mind and soul, is contemplative encounter. It is conversation with great minds across time, humble reception of wisdom, patient wrestling with ideas until they yield their secrets. The ancient practice of Lectio Divina, divine reading, offers us the perfect model for contemplative study. This traditional method involves 4 movements: reading, meditation, prayer, and contemplation. While developed for sacred texts, these principles transform any serious reading into formative encounter. First, read slowly and attentively, allowing the words to sink into consciousness rather than rushing toward comprehension. Most students read too quickly, skimming the surface when they should be diving deep. A single page fully absorbed is worth more than a chapter hastily consumed. The goal is not coverage but encounter. This slow reading requires tremendous discipline in our speed-obsessed culture. We have been trained to consume information rapidly, to process maximum content in minimum time. But contemplative reading moves in the opposite direction, toward depth rather than breadth, quality rather than quantity. When we read slowly enough to truly understand, we discover layers of meaning that speed reading cannot access. Second, meditate on what you have read. This means allowing the ideas to turn over in your mind like precious stones examined in the light. What questions arise? What connections emerge? What challenges to your current thinking do you discover? This meditative phase is where mere information becomes personal knowledge. True meditation on a text is not passive absorption but active dialogue. You must bring your whole experience to bear on what you read, testing new ideas against what you already know, allowing conflicts and contradictions to emerge rather than smoothing them over. Great books change us, but only if we engage them seriously enough to be challenged by them. Third, engage in what we might call intellectual prayer, that movement of the mind that reaches beyond itself toward the source of all truth. This is not necessarily religious prayer, but that fundamental humility that recognizes our dependence on truth that exceeds our grasp. Great ideas are received, not merely conceived. This prayer-like attention acknowledges that understanding is ultimately a gift. We can prepare ourselves for insight through careful study and reflection, but the moment of true comprehension comes as grace. The humble reader, who approaches each text aware of his own limitations, is far more likely to receive genuine understanding than the proud one who thinks intelligence alone sufficient. Finally, rest in contemplation, that profound attention that simply beholds truth without grasping or analyzing. This is the moment when understanding crystallizes, when disparate elements suddenly organize themselves into coherent insight. Such moments cannot be forced, only prepared for through patient practice of the earlier movements. This method requires tremendous discipline in our speed-obsessed culture. But those who learn to read contemplatively discover that they understand and retain far more from fewer pages than they ever did from rapid consumption of many texts. Quality of attention determines quality of learning. Chapter 5: The Rhythm of Sustained Focus, Work and Rest in Harmony. One of the greatest mistakes modern students make is attempting to maintain constant intense focus without regard for natural rhythms. This is like trying to run a marathon at sprint pace. It leads inevitably to exhaustion and abandonment of the effort. True concentration is sustainable only when work is balanced with appropriate rest. The contemplative tradition teaches us about the necessity of alternation between labor and repose, between active attention and receptive rest. Even in the monastery, the most dedicated prayer is punctuated by periods of different activity. The mind, like the body, requires variety to remain healthy and productive. Understanding your personal rhythms is crucial for sustainable concentration. Most people can maintain peak focus for only 90 minutes to 2 hours at a time, but individual variations are significant. Some minds work best in short, intense bursts, others prefer longer, gentler engagement. Rather than fighting these natural patterns, learn to work with them. Discover your natural rhythms of concentration through careful observation. Track your energy and focus levels throughout the day for several weeks. When do you feel most alert and capable of deep thought? When does your attention naturally flag? What time of day produces your best insights? This self-knowledge becomes the foundation for scheduling your most important intellectual work. Rather than fighting natural limitations, honor them. Work intensely during your peak periods, then transition to different kinds of activity, physical movement, lighter reading, or simple manual tasks that allow the mind to process what it has absorbed. The transition itself should be deliberate and mindful, not an escape from work but a different form of service to your intellectual goals. The quality of your rest determines the quality of your subsequent focus. Rest is not merely the absence of work but positive restoration of mental and spiritual energy. Take walks in nature, practice brief periods of contemplative silence, engage in activities that bring joy without overstimulation. Avoid the pseudo-rest of entertainment that merely provides different forms of mental stimulation. Learn the art of what I call productive rest, activities that restore while also serving your larger intellectual project. Read poetry if you are studying philosophy, listen to music if you are working with texts, sketch or work with your hands if you spend long hours in abstract thought. These cross-pollinations often produce the insights that pure focused effort cannot achieve. The mind often continues working on problems even when we are not consciously thinking about them. Many great insights come during periods of apparent rest, while walking, showering, or engaged in simple manual activities. This is why forced continuous focus often proves counterproductive. The alternation between focused effort and relaxed attention allows both conscious and unconscious processes to contribute to understanding. Most importantly, include genuine leisure in your rhythm, time set aside not for productivity but for the simple enjoyment of being. The scholar who cannot rest cannot ultimately concentrate, because concentration requires inner peace. And inner peace requires the security of knowing that our worth does not depend on constant achievement. The goal is not to maximize work time but to optimize the relationship between work and rest so that both serve the deeper purpose of formation in truth. When work and rest are properly ordered, both become forms of contemplative practice. Chapter 6: Dealing with Mental Wandering, the Discipline of Gentle Return. Even the most dedicated student discovers that the mind wanders. This is not a failure but a natural condition that requires patient training. The contemplative tradition offers us profound wisdom about working skillfully with distraction rather than fighting it with brute force. When you notice your attention has wandered, the crucial moment is not the wandering itself but your response to discovering it. Most students respond with frustration, self-criticism, or renewed attempt to force concentration. These reactions actually strengthen the habits of distraction by creating inner turbulence around the natural fluctuations of attention. The frustrated response to distraction creates what we might call secondary distraction. Not only has the mind wandered from the object of study, but now it becomes preoccupied with its own wandering. This doubles the problem and makes return to focus much more difficult. The self-critical student spends more energy berating himself for losing focus than he would have spent simply returning attention to the task. Instead, practice what the masters call gentle return. Simply notice that attention has wandered, without judgment or drama, and quietly return focus to your object of study. This gentle return should be practiced thousands of times, becoming as natural as breathing. Each return strengthens the capacity for sustained attention. The gentleness of this return is crucial. When we notice distraction and respond with harsh self-correction, we create internal conflict that fragments attention even further. But when we respond with patient kindness, the same kindness we would show a child learning to walk, we create internal harmony that supports deeper concentration. Understanding the nature of thoughts helps enormously in this discipline. Thoughts arise spontaneously in consciousness like clouds forming in the sky. We need not identify with every mental event that appears. Most thoughts that arise during study are simply mental habits seeking expression. They have no particular significance and require no response beyond gentle acknowledgement and return to focus. Develop the practice of noting distractions without engaging them. When you notice your mind has moved to planning dinner, simply think planning and return to your text. When anxiety about upcoming obligations arises, simply note anxiety and return to focus. This creates a healthy distance between you and the constant stream of mental activity. This noting practice is not cold or mechanical but compassionate observation. You are simply acknowledging what is happening in consciousness without getting caught up in the content of distraction. Like a loving parent who notices a child's misbehavior without becoming upset, you observe mental wandering with calm awareness. Some distractions carry important information that should not be ignored. If genuine insight about your study topic arises, briefly note it and return to focus. You can record it properly during your next break. If persistent worry about an important matter keeps interrupting, perhaps you need to address that concern before you can study effectively. Learn to distinguish between significant distractions that require response and mere mental noise that can be ignored. This discernment comes with practice and requires honest self-assessment. Are you avoiding difficult material by creating false urgencies? Or is there genuinely something important that needs attention before you can focus properly? The goal is not to eliminate all mental movement but to develop the capacity to remain centered and purposeful regardless of what thoughts and feelings arise. This is true freedom, the ability to maintain chosen direction regardless of internal weather. Such freedom is the fruit of patient practice, not forceful suppression. Chapter 7: Advanced Practices, Contemplative Concentration for Serious Scholars. For those who have mastered the basics of focused attention, there are more advanced practices that can deepen concentration into something approaching contemplative union with truth itself. These methods require significant discipline but can transform not only the quality of your study but the quality of your being. The first advanced practice is what we might call transparent attention, focus so clear and effortless that the sense of strain disappears entirely. In this state, there is no feeling of forcing attention. Instead, consciousness seems to merge naturally with its object of study. This requires extensive practice of gentle return and cultivation of inner stillness, but it eventually becomes possible to study for extended periods without the usual sense of mental effort. Transparent attention emerges when the ego stops interfering with the natural movement of consciousness toward truth. When we cease trying to control the process of understanding and simply remain present to what is being studied, attention becomes effortless. This is not passive absorption but active receptivity, consciousness that is simultaneously focused and open. Another advanced technique is peripheral awareness, maintaining primary focus on your study while remaining subtly aware of the larger context of your learning. This prevents the tunnel vision that sometimes accompanies intense concentration while preserving the depth of engagement. You remain focused on the particular text or problem while simultaneously aware of how it connects to your broader intellectual project. This peripheral awareness requires what we might call spacious attention, consciousness that is both focused and expansive. Instead of narrowing awareness to exclude everything except the immediate object of study, you learn to maintain broad awareness within which focused attention operates. This broader context often provides insights that purely focused attention cannot access. Practice what the tradition calls one-pointed mind, the capacity to hold complex ideas in unified attention without losing any essential element. This is particularly valuable for philosophical and theological study, where multiple principles must be held simultaneously to grasp their relationships. It requires patient development of what we might call mental spaciousness, consciousness expanded enough to contain complexity without confusion. One-pointed mind is not the same as single-minded focus. While single-minded focus excludes everything except one element, one-pointed mind includes all relevant elements within a unified field of attention. This allows for understanding of relationships and patterns that cannot be grasped when attention moves sequentially from one element to another. Develop the ability to study in what we call contemplative presence, attention that is simultaneously focused and open, concentrated and receptive. This is the state in which new insights are most likely to arise, because consciousness is both directed and available to receive what exceeds current understanding. Contemplative presence requires a delicate balance between effort and surrender. You must be actively engaged with the material while simultaneously open to understanding that cannot be forced. This paradox is resolved through practice, learning to maintain purposeful attention without grasping, focused engagement without forcing. The highest form of scholarly attention is what the mystics call unknowing, the willingness to remain present to mystery without premature closure. Great scholars learn to sustain attention even when understanding is not immediately forthcoming, trusting that patient presence to truth will eventually yield insight that cannot be forced. This unknowing is not ignorance but wise patience. It recognizes that the deepest truths often reveal themselves slowly, requiring sustained attention over time rather than immediate comprehension. The scholar who can remain present to what he does not yet understand is far more likely to receive genuine insight than one who settles for superficial clarity. These advanced practices require years of development, but they represent the fullest flowering of the intellectual life, study that becomes prayer, attention that becomes communion with truth itself. Conclusion. True concentration is not a technique but a way of being, a fundamental orientation of the whole person toward truth. In learning to focus deeply, we learn to live deeply. The practices I have shared with you today are not merely tools for better studying but disciplines that form the soul for the reception of wisdom. Remember that the cultivation of attention is itself a sacred work. Each moment of sustained focus, each gentle return from distraction, each choice to engage contemplatively rather than superficially, these are acts of service to truth itself. Through such service, we discover that concentration is not something we achieve but something we participate in. Begin where you are, with whatever capacity for attention you currently possess. Practice these disciplines patiently, without demanding immediate results. The formation of contemplative attention is the work of years, but its fruits endure for a lifetime. What begins as effort gradually becomes effortless. What starts as discipline eventually becomes delight. May your study become prayer, your attention become worship, and your learning become a way of serving the truth that exceeds us all. In such service, you will find not only knowledge but wisdom, not only information but transformation.